what are some things that you've found over the last several months of not drilling techniques?
That's a good question. The biggest thing for me is that I've started rolling in ways that I've never rolled before, and I noticed that very clearly at an open mat I went to last week, where I was doing stuff that I just never do, and it was solely based on like these games that we play. And in my head now, as I'm rolling, I'm thinking of those really simple coaching cues, which are like the task focuses of the game. Like, for example, if I'm like passing the guard or something, all I'm thinking about is keep the feet off me. Unless I'm like, it changes a little bit if you're like maybe in like a chest to chest half guard position or something, but actually conceptually that could almost be similar. Like you just need to free your leg, but it's these coaching cues that I'm like, have changed in my head, and it's actually, I'm behaving completely different. And the funny thing is that like the amount of fully open, unconstrained rolls that I do nowadays is minimal. We're always doing like live rolling, but it's always like the constrained versions of it, right? And so like the only times that I actually do like full unconstrained rolls is at these open mats with like sometimes a lot of people that I've never even like rolled with or maybe even met before. And all of that stuff like translates so well into those actual like full rolls. So it's been like pretty I guess in theory it's like it's supposed to work, but it's been sort of like validating to actually see that stuff like emerge in my own game. It's been pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool. Is there a game in particular that you feel has like changed the way you play in like live open rounds more so than others?
Yeah, actually there's like that series of passing games we play, which this is not a plug on purpose, but we're going to record like a little mini instructional and put it up for people.
So you can plug that on purpose.
And now, well, now I'm plugging it on purpose. It is not, yeah, it's being plugged now on purpose, but now that you say that, actually, because those have been the ones that I've found the most use in, and I want to get your point of view on this as well, but it's specifically these games where from top position, you're learning how to stay as close to your partner as possible while keeping their feet off of you and then trying to pass the feet and the knees to get to their like center mass. And there's different like variations of that we've been doing and the structure game that we've been doing. And then conversely from bottom, I'm finding my guard retention to be a lot easier. And I've started playing new guards that I never played before. Like on bottom, I focus on keeping my feet in front of the person because jiu-jitsu is a zero-sum game. Whereas conversely on top, you keep the feet off the person. And like weirdly now what's emerged from that on bottom in these full rolls is I'm playing a lot of like collar sleeve and like shooting triangles and stuff. That's not me. I've always done like single leg X and ankle locks and stuff, but so that's for me, but I'm curious about you. Both questions directed back towards you. One is like how it's affected or changed your game, and then second, like which ones in particular have been most helpful to you?
Yeah, well, I feel like prior to starting to play these games, I was always thinking, you know, what technique goes here, or what do I do here? And I'm trying to like go through a Rolodex, so to speak, of moves. And I didn't feel I had a conceptual understanding of what it is I was supposed to do, or not as strong a conceptual understanding of what was required for those things to happen. And since starting to practice this way, I feel like my conceptual understanding of certain positions has shot through the roof. Like, I would say that's where it's affected me the most. Whereas now I'm not thinking about specific things to do, more so broader spectrum. Like you said, just keep the feet off of you. And if you can keep the feet off of you, then the thing that's supposed to happen, or the thing that you need to pass the guard will present itself, given their reactions. And so that's been liberating in a lot of ways. Like I feel way more creative. I feel like I'm able to think on the fly way more. So I would say that's where it's affected me the most. And the second question was which game in particular?
Yeah, but I had actually a response to that real quick.
Yeah.
Is like one thing I think it's really interesting that you're like a brown belt saying this, because like ever since I've known you, like you've always been really good at jujitsu, and like I'm gonna not actually start saying good things about Matt right now because his head's gonna go like really big. But like you've always been really good, and like and so the interesting thing is like hearing you as a like an advanced jujitsu player, I would call you that for sure. Like still. Like seeing these new like conceptual insights is pretty crazy to me. And then the other thing that you're talking about is like that idea of instead of going through a Rolodex of techniques, you're having a goal and it makes you achieve the thing that you need to achieve. Those are those like highlights so well those principles of self-organization and just responding to the environment. Like that's the entire like underlying thing that like that underpins that whole, I love that word, underpin, the theory of ecological dynamics, right, is that you're just responding to the environment. But so the next question was which ones in particular?
I mean, I think the same. We played, you and I have trained almost exclusively, I feel like, together over the course of the last several, couple months at least, in this style. And the passing and guard retention stuff has been huge. I feel, like you said, like I'm doing things that I'd never done before, and I'm not thinking about anything really when I am doing this. It's like I feel like I'm finally able to like let my mind go and just like solve the problem, which has been really cool. The guard retention stuff is great. I figure, and we get this question a lot because we'll bring people in, and the question will always be, well, okay, well this doesn't look like what I would do on the mats. Well, aren't I gonna like develop bad habits, or am I gonna forget to grip with my hands or whatever? And I guess there are I don't know if it's two answers to that, but this I always come back to like my experience in coaching hockey, because this is actually how USA Hockey like teaches coaches to coach, and it's one of the reasons that the U.S. is now ascended to maybe top 3 hockey countries in the world on a yearly basis. And when I was on the ice and we would coach this way in these small area games, like the example I'll give is like sometimes we play 2-on-2 in the corner. Like hockey's played 5-on-5. We'll play 2-on-2 in the corner and put certain constraints on the players in order to force certain behaviors. Not one time did a player say, well, I'm going to have 5 players on the ice in a game. What if I forget? I've got 3 other players. Like that's never happened. Nor has it been like, if we said, okay, you got to make X number of passes before you shoot. Nobody in a real game has been like, well, I thought I had to make X number of passes before I shot, so I didn't shoot. Like it just doesn't happen that way. So I don't know. I'm kind of rambling, but that's like.
Well, it's a really important point, because like it all goes back to this idea of responding to your environment, right? You put yourself in an environment, you're going to respond to that environment. If you're in a what is it, like a 2 versus, if you're in an environment where there's different numbers of players, you're going to respond accordingly, and that's going to focus on building like specific skills.
Correct.
That can be highlighted because of that.
Yep.
And just because you're put into a new environment doesn't mean you're going to behave like you were.
Right.
You're gonna like. This goes to the concept of transferability. Like if the thing represents parts of the game, and you're highlighting and building those skills that you highlighted in the less in the more constrained version of the game will transfer into the full game because of as long as it's representative enough. But this goes back to if anybody watches Greg Souter's most recent seminar at 10th Planet. He answered this question in another way, which is there is no one game or anything or training approach that is going to be all encompassing to build every skill.
Right.
And we can flip that back to the information processing approach of drilling techniques, right? That's like, if the question here is like representativeness of the actual game, let's talk about drilling then. And like, how representative is that of the full game? And are you building all the skills that you're gonna try,
Right.
like
Yeah.
you're drilling like a specific arm bar, like a 6-step arm bar or something. Like I would, if we're talking about representativeness and like transferability and all of those things, and whether like a game or a drill or whatever is missing things, like we should ask those same questions about drilling a 6-step move, right?
Agreed.
So like the question to me isn't necessarily about like, the question to me is just how do we build the most efficient way to train skills, and like, yeah, there's that like spectrum of like transferability all the way from drilling to, yeah.
What are some of the common misconceptions or yeah, well, what are some of the most common misconceptions that you've come up against? Like, you've taught a few classes at this point,
Yeah.
so you're probably a little more used to hearing the questions about the approach. I'm curious to know like what's popped up more often than not for you.
That's a good question. I would say, yeah, because I've taught, I think, like 4 or 5 classes at this point. There's videos on there, on those, by the way. There's one at Kaboom BJJ with Kabir Both in Vancouver. And I have another full class that I taught at BAME Jiu-Jitsu, which was a gi class. And I've taught like 2 or 3 more since then, which I haven't put on YouTube. But it's definitely been a wild learning experience. And I guess the things, let me see, because the classes I've taught at BAME, like Denny has been running classes where he utilizes a lot of parts of the constraints-led approach, and he implements those into the classes. So the students have been mostly exposed to like the traditional approach and sort of this mix that Denny has been doing, which is cool. So they've had like all of these different types of experiences, and then I'm like, the classes that I went in there and did were like as close to, I don't like using these words like pure eco and hybrid eco and stuff, because I don't think those terms exist. Okay. Actually, I was talking to Denny about this too. But like as close to like what I think is like the truest representation based on the information I currently have of the constraints-led approach. So it's been like this spectrum of things. So they've seen different sides. And I think actually the biggest question is like that question of, is this gonna build bad habits? And it's funny that people have that question of representativeness of the game when the alternative that they're saying to do is to drill techniques. Like, how is that representative, right? If we're talking about representativeness. So I say bad habits, and then I'm trying to think if there's anything else. It's like, I guess these questions of the biggest one is how it benefits beginners versus more advanced players.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. Can you comment on that more? Like,
yeah.
Talk to me about like if you were a day one, or if you were coaching a day one white belt, which I think you have.
Yeah, I've coached like probably like 5 at day one white belts at this point. Okay. Yeah.
And how did you approach that in a class setting?
Probably not in the most optimal way. I mean, I think there's a way to think about coaching that in a class setting versus how you just think about applying these principles to beginners, like the spectrum of skill level, essentially. And on the spectrum of skill level, we can talk about that first, is I think a lot of it has to do with the task simplification. So if you have a beginner that you're trying to teach something, you need to give them the simplest possible goal to accomplish and let them try to build that skill. So that's going to look a lot more constrained, a lot more different than something that you might give to a more advanced player. Right. And we've done that a lot with like our armbar games, like grip breaking from arm bars and stuff. Like I simplify my task a lot more because I can't do it well yet, and I don't know what positions I'm trying to get to. And you've historically been starting with like the more difficult positions, so like the spider web and stuff like that. Yeah. And then the question of how you implement that in a class is a separate question, which is like how you pair up different skill level people. If you can demonstrate a game and then also show like easy, medium, and hard version of it for different people to choose. And then you also have like Greg Souders, for example, at his gym, he has the foundations class and the all levels class. Foundations is for, he says, like people 2 years and under, and then all levels would be anybody And then he has like his comp class. So there's, I guess, different ways to structure it, but I'm not like obviously the expert on like class design and that kind of thing. And that, I'm learning a lot about that.
But I think you have the right idea as far as like the task simplification part of things. I think is so important, and it's something like, forgive me if I'm like coming back to, like, because I don't have any experience in coaching this way in jiu-jitsu, but you know, once you started to bring this to light, and if you've listened to other podcasts, whoever's listening, or other episodes of our podcast, you may have heard like that sounds like hockey. So every time Josh would bring something up, like I was like, wow, like that's actually what we did on the ice. But that task simplification, I think, is so important. And another thing that you touched on that I think I can relate back to is like pairing people with the right partner, right, to make the game apt, right? So like when I was coaching on the ice, you typically have 15 to 20 players, and it wouldn't have made any sense for me to put my least skilled player in the same group as my most skilled player, because my least skilled player would be overwhelmed trying to keep up, and my most skilled player would be bored because they wouldn't have enough of a challenge. And so learning to very quickly figure out who fits where on the spectrum, and then put them with people who are going to push them, but not push them so hard that they can't function, and vice versa. You know, not put them with people who are so far below them that they just like have nothing to work on. I think that's a useful skill as a coach, regardless of the sport. It doesn't matter, jiu-jitsu, hockey, basketball, whatever. And then, like you said, like learning how to scale tasks so that they are, you know, harder or easier for certain people. So, like for a drill on the ice, you know, I say drill, whatever, an exercise that we're doing on the ice, you know, you might give your top skilled players extra constraints to have to deal with, or less, right? Like it could go either way, and vice versa. For like the lower skilled players, you know, either adding constraints to make sure that they are really, really, you know, we're focusing on this one type of behavior, or giving them more room to play, you know, depending on what your intention is. So, yeah.
Cool. I think we got to start wrapping it up, but that goes back to some stuff we could talk about again in the future, which would be like this idea of you and I, and training with these small groups as well. We've noticed this thing about everybody has different competencies.
Yeah.
So like even a lower belt might be more skilled in a very specific area than like a higher belt, and that's kind of the interesting thing about constraining these games too, is that this concept of like what will be frustrating for one person might not be frustrating for another person, and that like depends roughly like on your broad skill set in general. Like you could say a brown belt is more skilled in most areas than a white belt, obviously, right? But then bring the belts even like closer together and stuff, and you start to see that like these competencies there's kind of a smattering of them, and like designing games around those, and then this idea of unevenness. We train together, and like historically, like when I came up training with you, like you've always just like pinned me to the ground and then taken my back and choked me or something, right? And these games can be set up in such a way where newer players, even white belts, have a chance to do something against higher belts. But we should talk about those more. I think we're hitting the end of the episode, but do you have any closing
No, I
thoughts?
think for anybody watching, if you want more information on it, Josh's got a lot of stuff on his YouTube channel. Go check it out. He's made some really cool videos about the ecological approach and constraints-led approach that I think are super useful, especially for new people getting into it or people who are just now hearing about it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, Matt.
You're very welcome. That does it for this episode. Thanks for listening, everybody. If you enjoyed it, leave us a comment, subscribe. You can follow us or subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Instagram, TikTok. If you found this useful, share it with somebody that you know. Otherwise, thanks for the roll.
Thanks for the roll.